Well, good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. Appreciate your braving the cold temperatures. Hopefully I've got the heat turned up high enough. Tonight we're going to talk about permanent weight loss. And that's different from weight loss. And we'll discuss the difference in a little bit. But that's our subject for tonight. And I've kind of got it kind of lined out how we're going to hit that right here on the chalkboard here. First thing is we're going to talk about why is it important that you maintain a healthy weight? Secondly, is there a difference between men and women regarding what is a healthy weight? Thirdly, how do you keep the weight off? That's really the problem. The title of the topic is permanent weight loss, the secret to permanent weight loss. Anybody can lose weight. That's easy. But keeping it off, that's the ticket. So here's where we really start to get into something unique. And then, what is metabolism? What is the basic problem with keeping your weight off? And what is the cure? And so that's the topics we're going to get into tonight. What I can tell you is that this information that I'm going to share with you guys has been information I have garnered over the last 7 or 8 years. And the way I learned this was not by reading a book or not by reading a magazine or anything like that. It was by literally measuring the metabolism that we're going to talk about. And I have a way of measuring it now. I developed a way about 7 years ago of measuring your metabolism. And as I've worked with people over that time and measured their metabolic parameters, I've learned all the stuff I'm going to tell you about tonight. Okay, so let's start off with what seems to be maybe an obvious answer to this question: why a healthy weight? I mean, the obvious answer is that everybody knows that all the statistics show if you're overweight, your incidence of every disease across the board increases. There isn't one that doesn't increase on. And also that the longevity, or how long you're going to live, decreases the more weight you have on. So we all know that it's important to have a healthy weight. For that reason. But let's dig a little bit further into it and and see what's below that. What's causing all that? Well, first of all, when you have excess weight, you have excess fat cells. Excess fat cells make what we call inflammatory products. So they actually make things. All cells are doing something. Fat cells are not any different from all other cells. They do things. One of the things they do is they make inflammatory molecules. Now you can measure this with the C-reactive protein test. But these inflammatory molecules can do things like cause diabetes, can cause heart disease, can stimulate some of the processes involved with cancer, and so a lot of the diseases that are associated with excessive weight are associated with the way that the fat cells make these inflammatory products and in the effects of inflammation. So when you lose the weight, you lose the inflammation and you lose those markers. But perhaps the most important aspect of why it's important to lose weight has to do with why you gain the weight in the first place. Because there aren't that many people that gain weight by just going out and deciding they're going to gorge themselves. You know, that's the typical model we have in our heads, but my experience has been that the people who have the biggest problem with weight are normally the people that eat the least. So what's that all about? And what I can tell you, it's all about metabolism, because underneath everybody's problem, every person has a problem with weight, with rare exception, but every person has a problem with weight. Underneath that is a metabolic disorder that we're going to talk about tonight. Now, that metabolic disorder will cause them to gain weight, but it will also cause them to age faster and get all the diseases. So there's basically two reasons why you want to maintain your weight healthfully. One is because the weight itself creates inflammatory factors. But two is more important even yet, and that is that the process that caused you to gain the weight in the first place also causes all the diseases in and of itself. So in order to get your weight permanently corrected, you have to correct the process that caused it in the first place. And that's why you limit your risk of disease and you improve your longevity, because you're getting rid of the inflammatory products, but at the same time, you're improving your metabolism. Okay. Now, there is a difference between men and women here. And this is nothing you're going to read about. So what I'm about to tell you is going to probably be totally new information to you. I know I have never seen it published anywhere, but I'm here to tell you this is absolutely true. And I got tipped off on this about maybe 5 years ago. And I had a young woman, she was age 26, something like that. She was a professional mountain bike racer. So she was a top echelon United States athlete, and she couldn't shake her 15 pounds. And so what's that all about? So we did some testing on her, and we found out there's no real reason for her to shed that 15 pounds. She has no inflammation products. She has nothing wrong with her metabolism. That's just the way she's built. And what I've seen this over and over and over again. And the reason kind of comes down like this. Even though we live in a modern age and where food is plentiful, even though we live that way, truth is that our genetics today are no different than the genetics that were on this planet 20,000 years ago. And they know that because they can dig up skeletons, check the genetics of the bones, match them to ours, and there's not much difference. So basically, you can stop thinking for a while. You may be a modern day woman, but you're living in a caveman body or cavewoman body. Now, back in the old days, 20,000 some odd years ago, there was benefit to women maintaining weight, right? Because you had to bear children. You might very likely be pregnant. You might very likely be pregnant plus nursing 2 children. And so if there wasn't any food plentiful, you're in a world of hurt. You need that food. So God evolved us a way for women to maintain a lot of body fat without it being a negative health consequence. So what we know is that that's true, and this is basically the reason. Because there's survival value, at least in the 20,000-year-old model, there's survival value to a woman being able to be very healthy and yet walk around with an extra 30, 40 pounds of fat on her. Now, that's not true for men. Because what do the men have to do? While the women are bearing the babies, taking care of the babies, doing all this kind of thing, what the men have to be doing is running around with spears, trapping, killing something so that everybody can eat. So there is no survival value for a man to be fat. A man must be lightweight, fleet, heavily muscled, and able to go about that kind of duty. So here's how all this boils down. Here's where I'm coming to. About 20 to 30% of women that are over the weight limit. They have 20, maybe 30 pounds of excess fat on their body. About 20 to 30% of those women, there's nothing wrong with them. That's perfectly healthy for them. If you were able to isolate out those 20 or 30% of women and follow them, you would find they have no increase of disease, no increase of cancer, no increase of diabetes, none of the things that we associate with obesity. And the studies kind of bear this out too. So when you look at longevity studies with women versus men in obesity, you find this is quite clear. The women don't necessarily get the same disease rates for the same amount of weight as the men do. So what I'm here to tell you is for every 10 women that are out there that are battling a weight, probably 3 of them don't need to be, except for cosmetic reasons. And the reason I bring that up is because for those 3 women, it's very tough. It's very tough. It's very Slow going. Why? Because there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing to fix. That's the way they're wired. So it's almost sort of like you got a big nose, you were born with a big nose, you want to do something about it. Well, I'm sorry. That's just the way you're wired. It's the way you're built. Have a surgery. So for those ladies, it's almost, if that's the way, if you don't like that, go have liposuction or something. It does come down to that. Now, they can lose weight, and we'll talk about how they can lose weight. But these are the cases. If you are a woman like that, or you know somebody that's like that works really hard to lose weight, and it's difficult compared to the woman over here that can lose it rather rapidly. Of course, you put her right back on again. Then you may be one of those ladies that's really quite healthy, and that's just the way God made you. It's a little hard to get around it. Now, we want to compare that against men, because if there's 20 to 30% of women that can walk around with excess body fat and be completely 100% healthy, there's 0% of men. So guys, you don't get off too easy. If you have extra fat on your body, I guarantee you that's got a negative health consequence. That also will help you to explain one of the reasons why it's so much easier for men to lose weight. As a whole, it's so much easier for men to lose weight, and there are other reasons, but certainly one of the reasons is when we put on weight, it's a marker of a very unhealthy metabolism. All you got to do is correct the metabolism, bang, weight falls off just like that. You have one of these ladies, and they want to drop that 20 or 30 pounds, but they already got great metabolisms. So how are you going to make that happen? You can't fix their metabolism, nothing to fix. There's nothing broken, and so it's harder for them. So that is basically the big difference between men and women. Okay, so keeping the weight off. Basically, as you keep the weight off, so you lose the weight. And here's what I tell my patients. I don't really care how you lose weight. Now, I do give my patients guidelines. I do find that, statistically speaking, the easiest way to lose weight, and you're going to see why in a second, is one of the low-carb programs. But I don't really care if you go on a grapefruit diet, if you just go on a Weight Watchers diet, a Dean Ornish program, or what. It doesn't make any difference. Just as long as you lose the weight, that's not an interest to me. The interest to me and the key to permanent weight is the next part of the game. And that's what do you do after you lose the weight? Because you only have two choices. One is you can keep on that program forever. Okay? So you go on the Schallenberger diet, and you stay on the Schallenberger diet, and you're losing the weight, and you get down to your desired weight. Well, how are you going to stay at your desired weight? One way would be stay on the Schallenberger diet forever. Now, I don't know too many people that are going to want to do that, though. Normally, they think of a diet as something I'm going to do because it's tough. You got to like starve yourself a little bit, and you got to cut back and stuff. They don't think of it as I'm going to live this way forever. They think I'm going to get this way and get to my weight, and then I'm going to go back to my usual way, and everything's going to be good. It doesn't usually work out that way, but that's necessary. So one of your choices is just stay on the diet forever. The other choice you have is correct your metabolism. Correct your metabolism that got you in this hole in the first place. That's where the money is. That's where success is, when you correct the metabolism. Because as what I'm going to show you is, you come into this game, the reason you're having the problem with the weight in the first place is because there's some errors in your metabolism. And what I'm going to show you is, as you lose the weight, guess what happens to those errors? They get worse. So if you started off with that much of a deficit, metabolically, when you've lost the weight, you now have more deficit. So more or less guarantee you, if you don't correct that deficit, you will put that weight back on. More or less guarantee you. So that is the whole issue of keeping the weight off. Nobody's going to stay on a diet forever. It just isn't going to happen. Some people do, but it's very rare. But the secret is when you get down to that weight, whatever method you use, now you're going to correct your metabolism so it's adjusted to the new weight. And I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that in a second. Okay, so then let's get into the next question. What is metabolism? There are basically I measure lots of aspects of metabolism, but there are two areas of metabolism that really play a role in weight. One area is pretty basic for you guys to understand, and I think you've probably heard this concept, and that is your resting metabolism. Now, right now you're sitting in the chair, and we call that resting. I'm standing here talking, we call this resting. So when we're talking about resting metabolism, we're talking about, what your metabolism's like when you're in your daily level of activities, as opposed to out exercising or doing hard physical work or something like that, okay? So your resting metabolism. Now you stop and think about it. Well, isn't that the most important part of your metabolism with respect to weight? Because out of a 24-hour day, how much of that time are you in your resting metabolism? Well, you're going to sleep something like 8 hours a day. So 1/3 of the entire day, not only are you in a resting metabolism, but you're in a deep resting metabolism. Then the other 16 hours, you may, if you're good and you do what I would want you to do, you may actually exercise for 30 minutes, okay? But you're not going to exercise for 8 hours. Overwhelmingly in your day, your metabolism is all about what your resting metabolism is. So now, metabolism refers to, in this case, how many calories you burn per minute. So while each one of you is sitting there and while I am standing here, each one of us is burning X amount of calories per minute. Okay? The ones that are overweight are burning lower amounts of calories. The ones that are skinny are burning higher amounts of calories. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. And that's called resting metabolism. So resting metabolism refers to how many calories you burn while you're just sitting there. And if you want to know one of the major problems you have in why you gained the weight in the first place and why it's hard for you to lose the weight is because that is too low. You need to get that raised up. Okay? Now, but that's not all. One, you've got to raise your metabolism, but there's another metabolic defect that's almost more important than this. Your metabolism refers to the amount of calories you burn or the amount of energy you make, however you want to look at it. But you make energy two ways. One of them is by burning fat. You burn fat to make energy. The other is your cells can burn sugar to make energy. So they get their choice. It's kind of like if you had a car that had a diesel gas tank and had a gas tank, and you said, I think I'll just ride on diesel today. Diesel prices are better. Switch a little switch and you're riding on diesel. And then you come along, then another day says, oh, the gas prices are better. Bang, I'm going to switch it over to gas and ride on gas. Your cells can do that. They can decide whether to burn fat or whether to burn sugar. They get their choice. Now you might ask, well, why is that? Why did God design us that way? And the reason really is because we need to have a little sugar to burn because it's emergency type of energy. You can make energy off sugar without even breathing. You can't do that with fat. So if you could only make your energy off fat, let's say that was designed that way, if you held your breath, you'd fall over dead. Specifically, if you were to fall in some water, now again, we're talking about 20,000 years ago, okay, so you don't, but 20,000 years ago, you could have fallen in water, had to cross a river, had maybe gone under some water. You could have been in a forest fire and not been able to breathe. You could have had an animal kind of choking you and not being able to breathe, okay, so things could have happened, okay. If you didn't have the ability to burn sugar, you just instantly die. But because of that fact, human beings can burn sugar. So it's an emergency source of energy. Now, how do I know it's emergency and not to be used regularly? Because if it weren't an emergency, God would have made sure that you can store a lot of sugar. He would have made you have a big sugar storage capability. So you could just burn sugar day and night. But the truth is, your body can't store hardly any sugar at all. Let me give you an example. If everybody here in this room were to no longer be able to burn sugar at all and had to totally live off their fat stores, and we weren't eating anything, we're on a starvation program, 3 weeks later, we're all alive. So 3 weeks later, easily, you can starve for easily 3 weeks, live off your fat stores, even a skinny guy like me. However, if we, for some reason we couldn't burn fat and we're forced to live off our sugar stores, we would be dead in 3 hours. That gives you an idea how much sugar you can store. Very little bit. And the reason that is because you only need a little bit for an emergency. So keeping that whole scenario in mind, here's what happens. Number one, your basal resting metabolism is low, so you're not burning very many calories during your day. That's going to make you gain weight. It's going to be, if you're not burning many calories, it's going to be a whole lot easier to eat more calories than you burn. And how do those calories get stored? They get stored as fat, of course. Secondly, what happens to your metabolism is it doesn't burn fat very well. You start living off sugar. So it's a double whammy. It's like 2 punches in a row. Number one, your metabolism's down, you're not burning calories, and what makes it even worse is of the calories you burn, though they are not many, they're mostly sugar calories, and you're not burning fat at all. So let me put this into a scenario for you. You got your plate, and you're looking at your plate, and on that plate is some fat and some protein and some carbohydrate. Now, carbohydrate all breaks down into sugar, right? Okay. So, and then the protein just gets stored as protein. That doesn't get involved in energy mechanics, really. And then the fat that's on the plate, that's going to get stored as fat. Okay. So you eat that, and what happens is all that food gets absorbed and goes straight to your liver, and your liver's got all this carbohydrate, and your liver says to itself, what am I going to do with all this carbohydrate you just ate? Well, I've got a couple of choices here. One, I can take it and store it, but whoops, I can't store much carbohydrate, can I? So my carbohydrate stores are all full, so okay, I can't really get rid of it that way. Or two, I could convert it to fat, because the liver can convert the carbohydrates you eat to fat, but the liver says, you know, that takes a long time. So I'd rather not do that. I got to deal with this stuff. She just gave it to me. I got to deal with this stuff. I can't store it as sugar because there's no room on the shelf anymore. I can't convert it to fat all that well because I got to do something now, and that takes a long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to release all this sugar into the bloodstream. So what happens is the bloodstream sugar goes up. As the bloodstream sugar goes up, all the cells on the other end, due to the effect of hormones like insulin, they basically say, well, geez, what are we going to do? Are we going to burn fat or are we going to burn sugar? We better burn the sugar, but the blood sugar's all over the place. We have to burn sugar. She's feeding us carbs. The liver's dumping all the sugar into the system. We better burn sugar. So what's it not going to do? It's not going to burn fat. So this is the basic scenario of why people can lose so much weight if they just cut out carbs. Because what they're doing is they're treating the second part of this problem. Remember, it's 2 problems. One is your resting metabolism is low. Now, if you just eat carbs, if you stop eating carbs, that's not going to correct that part. Okay? But the other part of the problem is you don't burn fat so well. If you don't eat carbs, it'll correct that part. Because then when you eat that meal and all is on is protein and fat, there's no carbs on it, then the liver's going to say, I got nothing to do with carbs. Let's just dump fat into the bloodstream. Now the cells are going to say, well, what are we going to do? They just dumped all this fat, which, by the way, comes in the form of triglycerides. So if you've ever measured your blood triglycerides and you see that they're, say, over 100 or over 120, in other words, they're becoming elevated, this means that your body can't burn fat very well. It's making these triglycerides, but instead of burning them, they just sit there. So a high triglyceride level is an indicator of this second problem. You can have this problem without having a high triglyceride level, but that's a pretty good marker for not being able to burn fat efficiently. So what happens is, if you eat the fat, just the fat, you get all the fat in the bloodstream, all these triglycerides go up, and your cells say, well, you know, what are we going to do? She's feeding us fat. I guess we better burn fat. So what it starts to do is it starts to learn fat more efficiently, because the cells are basically going to learn to do what you teach them to do. And that's where long-term lifestyle becomes important. it's kind of like English as a second language, I think, a little bit. If somebody doesn't speak English and they're a student and they go into a classroom and all they ever speak to them is their own language, how much English are they going to learn? They're going to learn English at all because they're not getting challenged with it. And the cells are the same way. If you train the cells to burn fat, they're going to burn fat efficiently. If you train them to burn sugar, they're not going to burn fat efficiently. They're going to burn sugar efficiently. So the secret to correcting this problem is to train them to burn fat better. So in synopsis, what we're talking about here, what about metabolism, is there's two, let's just go over this once again. There's two basic elements that everybody has that can't lose weight efficiently. One is their resting metabolism is low. They don't burn that many calories per minute to start with. And two is, of the calories they burn mostly sugar calories and not very many fat calories. Add those two up and you got a problem. Okay? So that is, in essence, the problem. What the problem isn't is I don't exercise enough. That's not the problem. I know people who are overweight that exercise 10 times harder than I do, and they can't lose weight. That is not the problem. That's a cop-out. Somebody might say, well, you eat too much. I know there are people that are overweight that eat too much, and the reason they do that is because they gave up long ago. They said, the heck with it. This is impossible for me to do. But they didn't start off that way. People that are overweight never, woke up one morning and said, you know what, Frank, you're skinny. I think you ought to get obese. Let's just go out and party. That just didn't happen. What happened was changes to their metabolism. They got overweight, and after, X frustrating years of trying to deal with it, they threw the towel in. So that lack of exercise is not the problem. Overeating is not the problem. What's the problem? It's what I just told you. Those two metabolic things. So what's the cure going to be? It's going to be to correct those two metabolic things. So let's look at this a little bit more and see how you can do this. First of all, and this is the key element, you're overweight, you want to lose weight. By definition now, you have learned that because you're overweight, you have two problems, even if you don't measure them. If you were to come down to the clinic, I'll measure them, and I'll tell you how bad your problem is. I'll give you a number. If 100's perfect for your metabolism, I'll say you've got 63. That's bad. Or I'll say you have 80. So you'll have an idea just exactly how bad your metabolism is. And when I look at that number, I can tell you what you're up against. If I have a lady that's having trouble with her weight and her metabolism's 100, we got problems. Because there's nothing for me to fix. Okay? So, but automatically you know you have these two problems. You just don't know the depth of them. So you know you have a low resting metabolism. You know you don't burn fat efficiently. But by measuring, I can tell you exactly how bad it is. Now here's what's going to happen. Then you go out, you get on a diet, and you lose some weight. As you're losing the weight, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, two things are happening. One, that resting metabolism that was low to start with, it's getting lower. Your body says, your brain, which controls your metabolism, says, oh, look, she's starving. She's losing weight. The poor girl is starving. We better adjust her metabolism downwards so she doesn't starve to death. And that's what it does. So after about, whatever, 4, 5, 6 weeks, something like that, you notice instead of losing a lot of weight, you're losing less weight and less weight and less weight and less weight. Until you come to that magic little point in your life where you say, I am doing everything I was. I'm exercising the same way, I'm eating the same way, I'm taking the same supplements, I'm taking the same medications, whatever the heck you're doing. I'm doing the same thing, and I'm not losing weight. What's up with that? That's what's up with that. So you can begin to see that if you don't correct that metabolism, number one, to start with, it's going to be harder for you to lose weight, and it's going to be impossible for you to keep the weight off because it's going to get worse. The problem you started off with is going to get worse as you lose the weight. Secondly, the other problem gets worse. As you lose the weight, your body tends to go through hormonal shifts which cause you to live more off sugar. And you get to the point that you just like die for a donut, or you die for some kind of piece of bread or some kind of thing that will raise your blood sugar level. This is especially true in women, and it has to do, and this is a topic I'm not going to go into at length, but it has to do with something called a neurotransmitter, which is a brain chemical. Men have a primary brain chemical called dopamine. Women have a primary brain chemical called serotonin. Okay? Serotonin is very influenced by carbohydrate, particularly sugars. Now, just as an aside, I will tell you that dopamine is very influenced by alcohol and coffee. So what we see often is the ladies over here, you know, taking up on the carbohydrates and really getting in the sweets. And the guys over here drinking the beer and drinking the coffee. And, you know, neither one can figure out, why do you want to do that? This is so much better. But that's why, because this helps women, this helps men. But it's also, ironically enough, the downfall of both of us. Because the more carbohydrates you eat, the worse that chemical gets. And the more alcohol and coffee you take, the worse that chemical gets. So it's not a good solution. But what can happen if you go on a low carbohydrate diet for a prolonged period, 4 to 6 weeks would be prolonged enough, very often the woman's brain chemistry changes, and she will do anything to have carbohydrate because that'll enhance the brain chemistry. So at the same time this is going on, we kind of have to think about that a little bit. But that change in brain chemistry causes you to not burn fat as efficiently. So the two problems you started off with that made you gain the weight in the first darn place are now worse. That's what you've accomplished. Okay? Now here's the cure. Here's the solution. Here's what we do. When you walk in, we check your metabolism. When we see how bad your resting metabolic rate is, we give you things to raise it. Now, what do we give you to raise it? Well, one thing that will raise it is the hormone thyroid. A lot of people are deprived of thyroid. Their doctor will not give them thyroid hormone. They're grossly thyroid hormone deficient if you look at their symptoms, if you look at their physical findings, if you look at their resting metabolic rate. They're grossly thyroid deficient. But because the blood tests are so inaccurate at picking this up, they will be missed on blood tests. Blood tests will come back normal. And the doctor will say, oh, I'm sorry, you know, your blood tests are normal. You don't need thyroid, which is an absolute error. These blood tests have been shown in published studies to not be that accurate at all for diagnosing low thyroid states. They're pretty good for diagnosing high thyroid states, but very poor, and they will miss 80 to 90% of hypothyroid cases. So a lot of what we do is just give the hormone thyroid. Thyroid is the primary hormone that turns on your metabolism. Okay? Now, thyroid hormone is directly dependent on the amount of iodine you have in your systems. And studies have recently shown that almost everybody in this country is iodine deficient on one level or another. So virtually 100% of the people hearing me talk right now are iodine deficient unless they're taking iodine supplements or doing something special about it. That makes the thyroid metabolism even worse. Next thing up is the hormone cortisol. Now you've heard a lot on the radio about how cortisol will make you fat and all this. That is complete rubbish. Go in the scientific text and you will find out that cortisol is a hormone that stimulates fat metabolism. What happens as people get under stress is very often their cortisol will be altered. Now it's a funny thing. We don't really know why this is. But some of us, when we get under stress, our cortisol level will get very high. Others of us, when we're under stress, our cortisol level will get exhausted and will fall. So some of us, when we're under stress, will gain weight. Some of us, when we're under stress, will lose weight. I know you guys have seen this. And this is all about the hormone cortisol. So when we see that low resting metabolic rate and we want to do something to correct it, we're thinking, well, she's probably thyroid deficient. And let's give her some thyroid. She's probably cortisol deficient. If she has signs and symptoms of that, let's give her some cortisol. Thyroid doesn't work very well unless you give a hormone called DHEA, which is another adrenal hormone made by the same gland that makes the cortisol. So if you're going to give thyroid, you better give a little DHEA to balance it off. So now there's three primary things that I've talked to you about so far that are all hormones that will correct your resting metabolism and get it back to where it should have been in the first place. Then we look at iodine. And then I want to tell you, there's just a ton of other trace minerals, trace vitamins that people are often lacking in their diet that they need in order to be able to keep their metabolism. It made the headlines, and the FDA withdrew ephedra from the market. The truth is that just in about half a year ago, they republished a study which said, no, he didn't die of ephedra at all. Of course, that never made the headlines. FDA has now put ephedra back on the market. And I can tell you, of all the herbs I've used in the last 30 some odd years of working with this, that is number one. That will do the job. Why is ephedra so effective? Because ephedra does both of them. It raises your metabolic rate and it forces you into fat metabolism. So it fixes everything. So it's a fantastic herb to help move up that resting metabolic rate. Now there are other things that you can do to raise your metabolic rate. One of them is sleep. That will raise your metabolic rate. A lot of the times that people get into a double bind is they gain so much weight that they develop a condition called apnea. This can be very common. They start snoring and their brain gets deprived of oxygen while they're sleeping. When your brain gets deprived of oxygen while you're sleeping, you can't get into the deeper levels of sleep. When you can't get into the deeper levels of sleep, your metabolism falls. When your metabolism falls, you gain weight. When you gain weight, the sleep condition gets worse, and it's a vicious cycle. So many people, it's as simple as, let's get them to sleep correctly. Now, you can fit dental appliances in the mouth, and there's other ways that you can help people to kind of break that cycle and get out of that cycle. Some of us just selectively don't get sleep. I mean, I have patients that say, you know, I like staying up late. And I have to get up at 5 in the morning, but I'll stay up till midnight. So I only get 5 hours of sleep. That's not enough. And your metabolism will suffer. So get sleep. Another thing that you can do is exercise. If you exercise 30 minutes a day, it'll raise your metabolism for about 20 hours or so. So basically, if you exercise 30 minutes a day, during that day, your metabolism will be upregulated a little bit. So exercise can be very helpful. Another thing that can be very helpful, and you were asking me about this a little earlier, and that's coffee. Coffee raises your metabolic rate. It's a stimulant, right? You got to be careful with these stimulants like coffee and ephedra. You can't use too much of them or you have a counter effect. But just the right amount, mixed in with just the right amount of hormones, mixed in with just the right amount of thyroid, just the right amount of exercise, and you can correct that resting metabolism. So the idea is you walk in with a metabolic rate like that, you walk out with a metabolic rate like that. So automatically you're winning the game. Now, the next thing we look at is how well you burn fat. You walk in with a fat metabolism like this, you walk out with a fat metabolism like that. What's the fat metabolism all about? Well, it, to a large extent, is about many of the things I just mentioned to you. Because many of the things that I just said correct your metabolic rate also tend to shift you over into a fat-burning mode. Cortisol does, thyroid does, and the herbs I talked about, ephedra and caffeine, will do that. Exercise, if it's properly done, will. Now let me talk to you a little bit about this. If you exercise really hard, you will not burn fat. You will be teaching your body to burn sugar. Okay, so when your body is exerting itself in a very high level of exertion, it wants sugar. Fat's not fast enough a form of energy. It wants to go into your sugar stores. So one of the mistakes so many people that are overweight make, they say, you know what, I am so sick of this weight, I'm going to exercise like Lance Armstrong, and I'm going to get this weight off. And they do exactly the wrong thing. When you exercise, you want to spend at least half your exercise time at a relatively low part of exercise. So we do what's called interval training. So with the metabolic study, I can tell you exactly at one point of exertion you're burning maximum fat. We call that your recovery zone. That's usually a fairly mild form of exercise, like a very slight jog or maybe a brisk walk. It's not very hard. It's the kind of exercise you could do where you could talk to somebody on your cell phone and they probably wouldn't even know you were exercising. okay? So we want you during your exercise period to do that for about 3 or 4 minutes. And then for about a minute, we have you exercise hard because that'll stimulate your metabolism. And then after that minute exercising hard, another 3 to 4 minutes of exercising easy again. So the proper exercise is critical because if you don't exercise in the way I just told you, you might throw your exercise out the window for all intents and purposes. In terms, that exercise will raise your metabolic rate, but it won't correct the fat thing. The exercise I just talked about will do both. So we got sleep, we got various hormones, we've got herbs, we've got proper exercise. These are all things that you can do to raise your fat metabolism. So out the door you go with an enhanced fat metabolism and with an enhanced regular resting metabolism. And then we're going to talk a little bit about carbs. Because as I just explained to you, if you have a significant problem with your fat metabolism, and again I measure this so I know who does and who doesn't, then we know you got a problem with carbs. Unfortunately, we live in a society that's for the last, I don't know what, since I've been a doctor almost, last 40 some odd years, has stressed the importance to human beings about eating carbs. The dietitians all talk about this. I interviewed a dietitian only 3 months ago, and I couldn't get it through her head that it's not important to eat carbohydrates. She was told that it was, and she doesn't know that it isn't. So we're living in a society where the so-called experts are telling everybody that you have to have carbs. So let me clarify this for you. And it's the same way that I clarified it for the dietitian. There are something like 8 essential proteins. We call them amino acids. What the word essential means is you better be eating them because you can't make them and you need them to live. So you better eat all 8 of those proteins or you're going to have health consequences. They're called essential proteins, okay? It's very important to eat protein. It's my message. There are 2 essential fats. It's critical you eat those fats. You don't, you're going to have health consequences. How many essential carbohydrates are there? Anybody know? 0. There aren't any. Technically speaking, you do not need to ever again eat a carbohydrate, and you can be totally healthy as long as you eat those 2 fats and these 8 proteins in terms of dietary nutrition. People will say, well, geez, carbohydrates include fruit, and fruit has lots of vitamins and lots of electrolytes and lots of minerals in it. And I will say, yes, that's true, but so do vegetables. And vegetables don't come with the big carbohydrate load. And somebody will say, well, potatoes? Potatoes have lots of nutrients in them. And I'll say, yes, and so do vegetables, but they don't come with the carbohydrate load. And somebody will say, well, grains, the whole grains, they're good for you, right? They have all that fiber, and they have all those good nutrients. And I'll say, yes, but so do vegetables without the carbohydrate load. So you kind of get the point. You don't need to eat carbohydrates. And when I say that, I'm specifically talking about grains. So that means wheat, flour, chips, corn, all that stuff you guys love. We all love them. It means the cookies, the crackers. It means all the sugars. It means all fruit. It means fruit juice. It means the dried fruit, the raisins. It actually even means beans and soy products because soy products come from the beans, and those are all starchy, right? So what I'm telling you is you can get by for the rest of your life and never eat those and not only not be sick, but probably be one of the healthier people on your block. Because the problem is we live in a society that is so pushed those and so, ingrained in our minds that we have to eat fruit and we have to eat whole grains and the sugar's okay and all this kind of thing that we are just drowning ourselves in carbohydrate. And when I talk to somebody and I say, listen, you got to cut out that carbohydrate, it seems very unnatural to them. I mean, I'm sure they leave the office thinking to themselves something like, that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit my picture of what a good meal looks like. It ought to have the carbohydrates on it. It just doesn't work. I will tell you right up front that for many of you that are struggling to lose weight, if you don't cut out the carbs, it will never work. And I mean more or less cut them out on a permanent level. How does that shake down? It shakes down like this. When you first come and you first start doing the program and we're raising your metabolism and we're raising your fat ability, you better cut out the carbs because if you don't cut out the carbs, we will not be able to raise your fat. Again, remember what I said. Your liver's going to say, oh, look, she just ate carbs. The cells are going to have to burn the carbs. What can't they burn is fat. So we get you on a pretty strict no-carb diet. And this, of course, is if your tests indicate this, but I'm here to tell you that 98% of the time, that's what the test shows. So we get you on pretty much a no-carbohydrate diet. The weight comes off, the metabolism goes up, you feel great, everything's wonderful. But what's going to happen is over time, as you lose less weight, and as we keep correcting all these things, you will burn fat so efficiently, we can start adding some carbs in a little bit down the line, and you won't suffer from it. So it's not a permanent no-carb life, but it is sort of a permanent less than what everybody eats carb life. Now, for some of you, this is very serious. On one end of the extremes would be people with diabetes. They literally should eat no carbs ever. On the other end of the extreme are what we call fast oxidizer body types. I'm close to one. I've been skinny all my life. It would be hard for me to gain weight. In fact, my wife and the staff has told me, you're too skinny, you need to gain some weight. And I have tried to gain weight just for kicks, and it wasn't that easy. So wouldn't you like to have that problem? But on the other end of the bell-shaped curve are people that can eat lots of carbs and not gain weight. But here's the news, it's not healthy for us either. We won't gain weight from it, but carbs have other negative consequences that aren't good, that I'm not going to talk about tonight. But for most people, they're along that spectrum somewhere. They're either severely carb sensitive and they can't have any, or they're moderately carb sensitive and they can have some, but they just kind of have to watch it. And part of what we need to do with these people is identify each person and kind of give them some guidelines on how much carbs they can eat. And the only way to really objectively do that is with testing. So we test how well you're burning fat. If you're burning fat, somebody comes to the office and they burn fat great, then I say, well, whatever amount of carbs you're eating must be fine. It's not suppressing your fat metabolism. And they might say, but I eat a lot of carbs. And I'd say, fine, that works for you. That works for your metabolism. So the next poor soul that walks in, I say, you're not burning fat very well. You got to cut back on your carbs. And she'll tell me, I don't eat any. That's because even though she doesn't eat any carbs, her fat metabolism still is lousy. And of course, that's what we do. We go through those things that I was just telling you about to correct it. So here's the scenario then. Let's make a little synopsis of it. You got two problems that cause you to gain the weight in the first place. You go to lose the weight, the two problems get worse, and you regain the weight and give up, and after a while you say the heck with it. Or you start to look at those two problems and you say, if I've got the metabolism, let's improve it. So we bring your metabolism up in the methods we told you. If I've got a difficulty with fat metabolism, we're going to bring it up with the methods I told you. And then what's going to happen is not so magically, you're going to lose a lot of weight. But over time, of course, you're going to call me up and you're going to say, all right, it's happening. The weight loss has slowed down. For the last 3 weeks, I've been adhering to the same program I've been doing all along. I lost 15 pounds right off the bat, and now I'm not losing anything. I'm saying, do you gain? And they say, no, I don't gain. I say, well, yeah, you reached that plateau. You're not going to gain. And you're not going to lose either, because what's happened is everything's falling back down again. Come in, let's test you. They come in, we test them. Sure enough, we see that the metabolic rate and the fat burning rate has slowed down. We jack it up again. Off they go for the next interval of time to lose the next amount of weight until it happens again. And because what's going to happen again? They're going to lose another 15, 20 pounds. It's going to come back down again. They come back in, jack it up again. And we keep, this is the scenario. This is the cure to permanent weight loss. Constantly looking at your resting metabolism, constantly looking at your fat-burning metabolism, and constantly adjusting it as you lose weight until finally there's this happy little day where you come in and you say, I am now at my desired weight. It took me 8 months, it took me 6 months, it took me 3 months, whatever the amount that was that you had. I am finally at my desired weight, and we adjust your metabolism for the last time. And then you stay there. You remember, you had two choices: to stay on your diet forever, which you're not going to do, or to adjust your metabolism, which is kind of a happy thing and it's pretty easy to do. Now, sort of the magical little thing in this whole deal is the following. As you're going through this process, not only is your metabolism changing in the ways I've described, but you are changing. your whole attitude about how you eat, your whole attitude about exercise, your whole attitude kind of about yourself a little bit, because most people that I see, not all, but most people I see have struggled with this. And when I say struggle, I mean they failed. I mean, it's like if you went to high school for 40 years and you still haven't graduated. And that affects them. That really affects them. They have a negative attitude, not only about weight, but they can get, that negative attitude can extend to other things about them. So what happens is they change. And as they change, the beautiful little magical thing that happens is the whole metabolism starts to change on its own. Their body, another thing, and I haven't mentioned this to you, but part of your metabolism has to do with your body composition. The more fat you have, the lower your metabolism. The lower your metabolism, the more fat you put on. The more fat you put on, the lower your metabolism, until it all equals out at some point. But it works the other way too. The more fat you lose, the more lean body mass you have, the higher your metabolism. The more fat you lose, the more lean body mass you put on, the higher your metabolism. And so what happens over time is that magical little thing, you change in terms of your attitude towards life and what you eat and how what your lifestyle is. And what seems like at first, maybe that was hard for you to get your sorry little rear end out of bed to go exercise it for 30 minutes a day. Maybe that was rough for you. But what you see is after a while, no, you kind of look forward to that. That's not a rough thing anymore. It's kind of a good deal. Why? Because you're successful now. It's different than when you weren't successful. And then as the lean body mass comes up, your whole metabolism starts to correct. So this stuff actually does correct. And we get to lighten up on you a little bit down the line. But always, you got to always remember that to a certain extent, what you're dealing with is the way God made you. And the key to permanent weight loss, the key is ultimately to be able to adapt your lifestyle to those genetics you were born with. And once you get that little adaptation just right, and that's how I help you, by looking at your metabolism and getting that all in measure. Once you get that right, the rest is pretty easy. Okay, so do you have any questions about it? Sounds easy. In theory, it is easy. And the way it works out, it is very easy. But I mean, it's sort of, I liken it a lot to going to law school or going to medical school or something. When I graduated from medical school, I said, this is it for me. I am never for the rest of my life going to one more class. Because it was like 16 years of straight classes, and I was fed up with it. Had I known what it was going to be like getting into it, I might not have gone. My daughter just recently graduated from college and said, I want to go to law school. And now that she's in law school for a year and a half, she says, boy, they really work you here. So, but the point is that if you knew what you were getting into, it would influence you. Maybe you wouldn't get into it. So it sounds easy. The fact is, it is easy. Once you get into it and do it, it is easy. It's easy because it works. And what's hard is something that doesn't work. I don't mind going out and working really hard and digging a ditch or something if it accomplishes something. But I really do mind if I'm going to go out and dig a ditch or do some kind of hard work and, when it's all said and done, nothing was accomplished. That to me is hard. Making something work to me is pretty easy. And being successful is easy. Part of what you have to do when you're doing this is realize you can't do this on your own. There are those stories out there you hear, but I'm telling you, if you talk to your friends and they say, oh yeah, I went on such and such a diet and I lost 30 pounds, and you could talk to them in a year. It's all gained back and plus maybe some more. So this kind of thing you need help with. There are a lot of things that are prescription oriented. You can't get them just over the health food store. But it is kind of easy. It's not that bad. You just got to be kind of disciplined and be willing. You got to want it. Where it gets hard is with the ladies that are healthy. So, if a woman comes in to see me and I tell her, I said, you're going to have a problem here. You're a lady that has 30 extra fat pounds on her and you're healthier than heck. There's nothing wrong with you. Your fat metabolism is right on the money. Your resting metabolism is right on the money. With you, it's a cosmetic issue. It is not a health issue. Now that gets to be tough. Those are the only cases I run into that are tough.
It really makes sense, though.
Yes, yeah, it does make a lot of sense. And I can tell you that this works because I've been doing it for years. I more or less guarantee you it works. If somebody does what I tell them to do, and they take the stuff that I tell them to do, it will work for sure. Okay, well, thanks for coming out tonight. I appreciate it a lot, and I hope you'll learn a little something.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Thank you.
okay.